Hello everyone, and thanks for joining us again at Seafood Matters, the podcast where we deep dive into everything about sustainable fishing. And if you love the ocean and what's on your plate, you're in the right place. Before we get started, if you enjoy the show, do me a favour, hit subscribe and drop us a 5-star review. It helps more seafood lovers find us and keeps the conversation going. Joining us today in this episode, we have Kathryn Novak, Director of Biodiversity and Nature at Sustainable Fisheries Partnership. Welcome to Seafood Matters, Kathryn. It's great to have you here.
It's great to be here. Thank you so much for having me.
Thank you. If I could start by just asking, where did it all start for you, Kathryn, and how did you eventually arrive at the Sustainable Fisheries Partnership?
Well, I grew up in upstate New York, which is not really anywhere too close to the ocean, but I was very lucky that every year my family would take a summer road trip over to the coast, usually somewhere along the New England coastline, Cape Cod or Gloucester, and we would take a vacation there. And I always really looked forward to that. And part of that was always too that we would go on a whale watch, and I would look forward to that all year. And we wouldn't just see whales. I remember once seeing a basking shark, and we'd see seals and porpoise. And I think that just really fueled my sort of passion and fascination for the oceans and marine wildlife. So I always knew I wanted to work in this field somewhere. And early in my career, I had the opportunity to work for the Ocean Conservancy, which is another wonderful marine conservation organization here in the U.S. I worked in their Florida office. And I did a lot of education and outreach. And then just, how it is in the NGO space, I crossed paths with Jim Cowie, who's the CEO of Sustainable Fisheries Partnership. And he was just starting SFP at the time. This was over 15 years ago. And in 2009, I joined SFP. And it was just starting. There were only maybe a dozen people working there. It was a new NGO. So I was really excited to be able to join the team early on. I think we have over 60 people globally now. And I was a part of the markets team. So really helping SFP to develop relationships with major retailers, major seafood buyers. So supermarkets, retailers, food service companies. And I really enjoy eating seafood. So for me, it was kind of the perfect marriage of being in the ocean conservation space and also being able to work on sustainable seafood, which all means a lot to me personally.
I come out with a similar one myself because of all the different parts of the seafood industry I've worked in over 50 plus years. Eating it is definitely the best one.
I agree.
And now that you're in I think we'll just call it the SFP rather than the full title. Are you comfortable with that?
I am. It's a mouthful.
Okay. Yeah. How do you integrate with the fishing industry to promote sustainable practices that protect the ocean wildlife?
Well, we tend to work more with sort of the other end of the seafood supply chain. So we work really closely, as I said, with major seafood buyers, so supermarkets, retailers, food service companies, and their suppliers. So the folks basically that buy seafood commercially from the harvesters. And we help those companies to better understand the details of their sourcing. So, there's a large variety of fish out there. If you go to any seafood grocery store, there are lots of varieties of fish in the fresh counter and the frozen section. So we help them gather data on their sourcing, the type of fish, where it came from, how it was caught, how it was farmed. And we realized early on that these major retailers needed a systemized way to collect that data to really be able to understand it. Because, of course, it changes seasonally, too, and factors like that. So we work with these buyers and their supply chains to help them gather that data on their source fisheries. And then we look at things like what's the health of the fish stock, how was it caught, what's the country of origin, and does that country have robust fishery management regulations and enforcement in place. And then we provide all that information back to these seafood buyers in like a dashboard where they can identify any risks in environmental risks in their seafood sourcing and address that. And we strongly encourage our partners and these companies that we work with to stay engaged with fisheries that may have environmental challenges, because then they're, if they're buying from that fishery, they're a key stakeholder in it. So they can support and encourage improvements and be a part of that process. So that's basically our approach and our model of how we work with the seafood industry.
That's good. That's great to have something like that in that area. And when you're involved in biodiversity and nature, the nature part, I love that, because just how serious does your organization take nature? What I'm coming from there, you mentioned earlier when you were saying about the different things you explained to your retailers and traders and that about, you mentioned seasons. To me, seasonality is a key to sustainability.
Mm-hmm.
It's so important.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, and I think when we're talking about nature and we're working with the folks buying and selling seafood too, we're looking at sort of the wider ecosystem impacts. So I think traditionally, or at least early on in sort of the sustainable seafood movement, everything was very focused on like the health of the fish stock. Is the fish coming from a healthy, thriving population? And that is absolutely important. But I think it's also important to look at what the impacts are to the ocean ecosystem. How is that fish being caught? Is the gear hurting the bottom habitats? Is it interacting with other bycatch species and other fish and marine wildlife, and just taking all of that into account? So I think when we're talking to seafood buyers about nature, that's kind of the lens that we're taking, is the broader holistic landscape. And I think that does include, to your point, looking at seasonality, looking at climate change more and more, and things like that.
Would you have a guideline on particular times of the year, and would you take it down as far as species by species?
Oh, goodness. In terms of a recommendation on what to eat or what to buy?
I'm just thinking, there's a organization, I'm pretty sure you know of them, Marine Conservation Society, and they have a traffic light,
Mm-hmm.
and it's red, amber, and green. And I just feel fish conservation is much more complex than three colors.
Yes, I would agree. I would definitely agree with that. There are so many species of fish out there that come from, globally, are being sourced globally by so many different gear types. And there are so many factors that I think go into defining sustainability and looking at the sustainability of a resource like that. Yeah, it's really hard to boil it down and simplify it that way. Although, I know for consumers, it's an easy, digestible way to have a guide or a reference to point to help you better understand some of those varieties. But yeah, it's certainly, I think that's one of the biggest challenges with seafood sustainability, is just all the variables. I mean, in a way, seafood is like the last wild protein, right? It's the last thing that the last protein that people sort of go out on the high seas and kind of hunt and gather. So yeah, a lot of variables to that it makes defining sustainability challenging.
I mean, over in Scotland here, I had a seafood restaurant around for 20 years. And my sort of, what do you say, catchphrase I used to use all the time is, if you eat fish in season, we're healthier and the fish stocks are healthier.
Yeah.
You see, when the integration with the buyers and that, what challenges and successes have you encountered in these partnerships?
Well, I think in terms of challenges, it's a lot of what I was just talking about. Just seafood is, I think, unlike any other protein, right? If you're a buyer and you're buying chicken or pork, right, it's there's chickens, there's pigs, and I'm sure there's a lot more to it than that. But with seafood, there are just so many different species that could come from so many different places, harvested with in so many different ways, not just wild, but there's a lot of farmed seafood, of course, as well. So there's just a lot to learn. I think there's a lot to consider. Again, when you're looking at the sustainability of any particular stock, there's fish stock or fish species, there's just a lot of information to process. And I think that's where an organization like ours comes in, because we try to help these seafood buyers who, are also very focused on, right, price, quality, safety, food safety. There's a lot of other factors, of course, that they're focused on as well. So the more sustainability information that we can provide to them in an actionable, clear way, I think, to help drive their purchasing towards sustainable fisheries, or fisheries, again, that may have challenges but are on a path of continuous improvement, that are trying to improve their fishing practices, are working with fishery managers to improve fisheries regulations and enforcement and things like that. I think that's a challenge that we're trying to sort of help address through the work that we do with the seafood industry.
Do you come across any challenges from the fact that you classed yourself NGO? Now, usually when the industry hears the word NGO, it's trouble.
Yeah. Yes, there is. That can be a challenge for us sometimes too. I mean, I do think that's one of the things that makes SFP unique, is that we work more business to business. So we don't have any sort of consumer facing campaigns or anything like that. We're just simply trying to provide science-based information to these companies. We have a public database called FishSource. It's open, free. Anyone can, look at the information that's posted on that website. So we try to be really scientific, data-driven, open and transparent with the guidance that we're providing based on that data. So I think that kind of approach helps. And at our heart, we are a conservation organization as well. But I think, when you're talking about sustainable seafood, it's also about the harvesters, and it's also important that they have sustainability is important for them as well, because healthy fish stocks are, their business. And so I think you have to include the perspective of harvesters in everything we do as well. And I think we try to do that. I feel like I got off track there a little bit.
That's okay. I feel good about where you're coming from and where you're going. And see, when you say you're stat driven and that, the information you would be giving the buyers, would you do that study, that surveys yourself, on stock assessment or anything like that? Do you do it yourself, or do you take it from another agency?
Yeah, our FishSource database that I mentioned, which is fishsource.org, I believe, that we have a whole team of folks that basically are just constantly scanning different fishery management bodies globally, country level RFMOs, things like that, to collect the most recent stock assessments, to collect the most recent data and science that whatever fishing regulatory body is putting out. So we do not do the stock assessments or anything like that, but we are capturing other publicly available data from those institutions. That's what we collect and provide back to retailers. And again, like the FishSource database it's very scientific. It's very filled with great data, but that's not something, if you're a seafood buyer, you're going to sit down and read a profile for a particular fishery, most likely, because again, you're working on buying and selling seafood and quality and price and all of that. So we try to take all that information in FishSource and make it into sort of actionable advice and guidance for a seafood buyer to easily digest. And that's where we also have another platform called the Seafood Metrics System. So we work with their suppliers to gather all the information on their source fisheries. It runs through that FishSource database, and then the Seafood Metrics System that they have is more of a dashboard that gives them the kind of high-level information from all the data that we've crunched. and gives them a sense of what environmental risks there might be in that fishery. And there's certifications out there, sustainable seafood certifications, kind of all of that data we try to combine in this database and just make it really easily accessible for the seafood industry and seafood buyers.
Would your logo be on packs of fish in a supermarket?
No, we are not a standard or anything like that. We just kind of provide the data and the information. Yeah, we're not a certification or a standard.
That's really good because it helps the buyers to guide them.
Yeah.
You've certainly got a key. I think it's fantastic. What are your views on retailer support and implementing sustainable fisheries practices?
Well, I think it's been very helpful. Again, I've been doing this for 14 years, and I think it's been a real success to see in the North American market, the UK market, and Europe, the increase in commitments that these major retailers and supermarkets and food service companies, the commitments they've made to source sustainable seafood. There's been a huge increase in that over the last 15 years. I remember going to see, we have an event coming up here in Boston in March, Seafood Expo North America. There's a Seafood Expo Global in Barcelona not long after that. And, 15 years ago, you didn't see the word sustainable on any booth at that expo. It's a commercial seafood trade show. And now that word is on almost every booth at the trade show. So I think sustainable seafood has really risen, really had a lot more visibility in the industry. And I think that's driven a lot by these retailers and companies that made commitments to sourcing sustainable seafood. And so I think that's been a big success. And I think retailers, supermarkets and food service companies have really driven that. And I think they have a big role to play, not only in sourcing just, certified fish from certified fisheries and sustainable fisheries, because again, I think that's only like 20% of global seafood trade has a certification attached to it. And that might just be for wild seafood. I'm not entirely sure of that stat, but that's what's at the top of my head. So there's still, there's a role for continuous improvement in seafood as well. There are still a lot of fisheries out there that are striving to meet that kind of high sustainability bar. So I think retailers can do a lot to encourage and support those fisheries along too.
I don't know how far you spread, but Sydney, Australia, our son is out there with his family. And one of the things that fascinated me when I was looking at the seafood counters there, it would tell you if it was wild or farmed. And that's the only, I have to say, that's the only place I saw that. And I thought, good on you.
Yeah, interesting. Yeah, we're seeing, I think, a lot more interest from the general buyers, people in where all of their food is coming from, right? I don't think it's unique to seafood, but yeah, I think consumers nowadays really are interested in knowing exactly where their food came from and how it was produced. I think that's driving a lot of what's happening in seafood as well.
Am I right in some of the major supermarkets are providing funding to help improve commercial fishing practices and protect ocean wildlife?
Yes, and that's something that we definitely encourage. If these major buyers of seafood are going to make these commitments and want to source sustainably, then it makes sense that they should support that in a variety of ways. I don't think we want to see the burden fall completely on the harvesters, particularly when it comes to things like protecting ocean wildlife, because that can often mean changes to gear that might be having impacts on other marine life, and that can be a big change, and it can be costly. So yeah, I think it's great to see these retailers funding fishery improvement projects, and we have something called the Bycatch Solutions Hub, which is a website. It's bycatchsolutions.org, and what we do is we try to find other conservation organizations, other fishing alliances and fisher harvester groups that want to maybe update their gear or want to participate in efforts to reduce their impact on marine wildlife. But again, sometimes those activities can be really costly. And so it provides a way for them to sort of post their projects on this website, and then we can match them with funders or retailers that might be sourcing from that fishery and want to get more engaged and want to help fund those improvements. So that's been something where we've seen some success. We've only had it for 2 years, but it's been really encouraging to see the interest from from retailers and some of these major seafood buyers to support those projects.
I think it's amazing. And what comes to mind as soon as I think of supermarkets helping to fund this is put your where your mouth is.
Yeah, and they're often a couple steps removed from, the harvesters themselves. The harvester will sell to somebody on shore at the dock, and then that person might sell it to a processor or a larger distributor that will then sell it to the grocery store. So it can be hard for a retailer to, find a pathway to be able to, fund the right people that are part of the fisheries that they're sourcing from. So yeah, I think it's been really cool to see how interested they are in learning more about how they can help and really stepping up.
When you talk about bycatch, what would you say is bycatch, and defining the problem? Why is it so hard to tackle?
So yeah, bycatch is basically, if you go out and you want to catch a tuna, but you put a line in the water and unfortunately you might catch a shark instead. Or if you think about, throwing a big net out, and some of these large purseaners can only be so precise with what they catch, right? They're targeting a certain species of fish, but they might also catch another species, a different species of fish that they weren't targeting, or again, some marine wildlife like sea turtles, seabirds, sharks, or marine mammals can all be impacted by bycatch. And the latter is really where we're focusing right now, is the bycatch of endangered, threatened, and protected species in particular. So again, things like albatross, sharks, sea turtles, and other vulnerable marine wildlife. And yeah, it is a challenge, especially on some of these high seas fisheries. Another problem is just that there's not a lot of data collection and monitoring. If you're a fisherman on a boat, I'm sure you can relate to this. It's enough work to try to catch the fish and, get it back on deck and get it frozen or whatever the process is. And then, if you need to fill out a logbook with what other species that you caught, there's a lot of data collection and monitoring that's lacking in some of these fisheries. And so I think that's part of the problem. The different fishing gears that can be used. There's some really exciting new innovative fishing technologies out there that can really help reduce bycatch, but they're often costly. And again, fishing is often a trade passed down through many generations. So in some cases, the gear may be the same fishing gear that's been used for 100 years, right? There hasn't been some change in the way fishing is carried out in some places. So it's a big change to not only maybe change your gear, but have to learn how to use a different gear. So we try to be really respectful of that with our work as well. And again, that's where it's so important to be able to encourage the broader supply chain, I think, to get involved in helping these improvements. And that includes the retailers.
To reduce the bycatch, what development in the Bycatch Solution Hub?
Yeah, so the Bycatch Solutions Hub, we are trying to sort of highlight some of those new technologies. I mean, one of the challenges and frustrating things oftentimes with the bycatch issue too is that there are best practices out there and proven ways to reduce bycatch in a lot of cases. But again, it can be more costly to fish that way. And so there isn't always the uptake of solutions and new technologies at scale. And so that's something that with the Bycatch Solutions Hub, we're really trying to promote these other best practices, these new fishing gears, so that there's wider kind of industry awareness of that. And, that can be simple things like switching to circle hooks to reduce sea turtle bycatch. Eliminating wire leaders on long lines can help reduce the bycatch of sharks. And, simple things like that, all the way to, in pot and trap fisheries in lobster and snow crab in the eastern US, they're looking at gear that eliminates the rope that, buoys. There's a buoy at the top of the surface, and then a rope that goes down to the trap, and that rope can entangle marine wildlife. And so there's something called on-demand fishing gear where the rope goes down with the trap. And then there's an acoustic pinger. When you're ready to go back and get the trap, you just push a button and the buoy will come to the surface. And that very new and exciting gear, but it's still in trials, it's expensive. There's a big range of sort of options out there to reduce bycatch. And we just want to support the ones that are best practices and support the ones that are innovative and new as well.
I know over here, the fishermen that have tried that said it's expensive. So hopefully after the trial stage and it's going into maybe they're producing more of them, it'll become less expensive, more competitive.
Exactly. Yeah. If it at the point where it can start getting adopted at scale, hopefully the cost of the individual units will come down. And in the meantime, I think the pilot projects that are going on, that involve harvesters and are getting their important feedback about how to make the gear, the most effective in whatever conditions that they're fishing in, making sure that it's safe. I think that phase of gear innovation is really exciting as well and important.
We find here in Scotland, up our sort of northwest coast, there's a lot of EU boats fishing with gill net and longline. And the fear we have is they very often lose their gear. And when you talk about bycatch, well, when they lose that gear, that's ghost fishing forever, and it doesn't rot with it being plastics, and that's a big concern for us.
Yeah, and actually, one of our sort of most successful, I guess, projects right now on the Bycatch Solutions Hub is actually smart buoys. And I think that's a really exciting technology that is, it's not super expensive. I mean, there's a cost to it, of course, but it's not super expensive. It's not any sort of change to the fishing practice. It's just like an extra, another buoy that you're adding to your gear. And it's really effective in reducing gear loss. And so I think that's really exciting because I absolutely agree with you that ghost gear is a big threat to marine wildlife and is definitely part of the solutions that we're trying to promote through the Bycatch Solutions Hub.
Our local boats, the Scottish boats, every time they come in and land, they'll be trawling, but they'll be putting in nets that they've picked up in their trawl. They'll be putting them ashore, every one of them.
Yeah. Yeah, and I feel like a lot of the ghost gear efforts have focused on cleanups and gear removal. So I think the smart buoys are really, it's exciting in the fact that it's about prevention of ghost gear. So we're really supportive of that technology.
When you mentioned including aquaculture, at what level are you doing that or doing in that?
We have an ecosystem aquaculture program as well. Here in the U.S., farmed seafood is sometimes 60 to 80% of what the retailers are buying. I know over here in the U.S., farm shrimp and salmon are very, very popular items. So if we want to be, helping retailers to understand the sustainability of their sourcing, that has to include aquaculture as well. And on our fish source database that I mentioned earlier, we do have profiles also for fish farming regions. And so we tend to look at aquaculture through the lens of the ecosystem impacts. There are a lot of aquaculture certifications out there as well that certify sort of farm by farm or look at sort of the processing of the feed, the farm, the hatchery, things like that. So we're kind of trying to take a different view and look more holistically and at the ecosystem impacts of if you have, 1,000 or 100 farms in one coastal area, how is that impacting mangroves or water quality or things like that? So that's sort of our approach to sustainable aquaculture.
And would you do anything as far as the two together, wild fishing and aquaculture, to get them together or integrate with them?
Yeah, it is really interesting, isn't it, how in the seafood industry, like wild and farmed are so separate, I guess. But then if you go to the grocery store, oftentimes, I guess not in Australia, you were mentioning that they actually label it wild and farm. But, when we go to the grocery store here, you don't see any differentiation of that when you're looking in the seafood counter, certainly not when you're looking at a restaurant menu. So yeah, it's funny how they're approached so differently in the industry. But yeah, I mean, we try to work with both as best we can.
How do you integrate with the fishermen? And when you're getting your stats, would you be doing that yourself, or would you have people on board fishing boats?
A little bit of both. I mean, SFP is a global organization, so we do have, I have colleagues in Indonesia and South America and all over the world that do work more closely with some of the individual fisheries that are of importance to the commercial seafood industry. And so in some cases, yes, we are working really closely with harvesters to help them improve their practices, to make sure that they're registered and things like that, to have a say in governance and fisheries management. But so that's kind of part of the work that SFP does. And then we also sort of work at the other end of the supply chain with the major buyers of seafood and just sort of helping them to better understand their sourcing and the suppliers too. But yeah, when there is a fishery that has an environmental risk, I mean, as I mentioned earlier, we definitely have an approach of encouraging continuous improvement. So, we definitely want those buyers to understand whatever the issues are and to get more hands-on down their supply chain with those fisheries. And so that's one way that we do that. And then with something like the Bycatch Solutions Hub, we are working a little bit more directly with fisher groups, harvester groups that again are involved in improvement projects or other efforts to maybe change their fishing practices to reduce bycatch specifically. And in that case, our role, the way that we're working with them is to try to find funding to help support those projects and to also provide them with a platform to talk about what they're doing and what the results are of those efforts. So again, that we can raise the visibility of that to the seafood industry.
When I was asking you that, it reminds me in a recent podcast I've done with a fisheries scientist in Iceland, Jon Christensen, and he says that he's retired now, but he's been in it all his life and he's still very active in it. He says the scientists, when they were doing their studies and surveys, they would be out with fishermen on trawlers. And then they decided they were going to build their own nice new big ships. And in his words, they didn't want to be on board a dirty trawler. So they had their own nice new ships. So they started going out and doing their own surveys with it. They'd be catching, they'd have fishing gear on board and they would be catching fish and doing their surveys. He reckoned that was the biggest mistake ever made. And this is a fishing nation like Iceland. And he reckons it's the biggest mistake ever made because in actual effect, what it did, it separated fishermen and scientists. He felt they both need each other and helped each other. He felt that was a big mistake in Iceland.
That's very interesting. Yeah. I mean, I think we always want to see kind of collaboration between those groups. I definitely think, harvesters have the most expertise, obviously, and knowledge about where they're fishing, how they're fishing, and things like that. And so I think it's equally a challenge when harvesters don't want to participate in those kinds of surveys and things like that. So yeah, there's definitely a healthy middle ground, though, that I think really helps fisheries management when both are engaged and talking.
Any examples of where innovative gear has been introduced successfully in the fisheries to reduce the bycatch or that?
Well, certainly I don't know, historical is the right word, but I live in Florida. And so there is a shrimp fishery in the Gulf of Mexico, the Gulf of America. I'm not sure what I'm supposed to call it now. That many, many years ago had interactions with sea turtles. So over time, with input from the harvesters, to your point, a new device was developed called a turtle excluder device, which is now pretty mainstream in shrimp fisheries. And that was developed right here in the Southeast US. So I think that's a huge success. More recently, we have been working with that on-demand gear in the lobster and crab fisheries in the Northeast, US and Canada. The Canadian snow crab fishery in the southern Gulf of St. Lawrence was one of the first fisheries that was really impacted by migrating whales coming into fishing grounds, the snow crab fishing grounds, earlier than they ever had historically. And I think that's been largely driven by climate change. The waters are warming up there much sooner. And of course, the whales want to get up there to get the great food source in the southern Gulf of St. Lawrence for their diet. And so interactions between the snow crab fishery and North Atlantic right whales caused that fishery to lose its certification. The government now, fishery managers, have established rolling closures when whales are sighted. And so the on-demand gear is the only way that harvesters can access fishing grounds when they're closed. So it's a win for harvesters because they can still fish, right? And that's the most important thing, keeping harvesters on the water and balancing that with, also keeping these critically endangered whales safe. So I think there's a great model there to see how the harvesters were very active in piloting the on-demand gear when it was still, as you said, it's expensive and it still needed a lot of piloting and testing in that particular fishery to make sure that it worked right and was safe and effective for the harvesters. And over the last couple of years, they've had a lot of success with utilizing that gear in the closed areas. And I think they're almost to the point now where it's no longer an experimental fishing gear and, anyone can use it. So that's a great success story, I think, more recently.
I think it's got more substance, and when you see something on a tin of seafood that says something like dolphin-friendly tuna or the like of that, and it'll mention species that if you look beyond that, well, they don't swim together anyway. So.
Right.
I think you've more substance than that, than what you're doing yourselves.
I hope so.
What is your vision for the future of world fishing?
I mean, I think our vision is one of abundant, thriving fisheries, of healthy ecosystems, and of resilient communities, which includes the harvesters and fishing communities. I think those three things, sort of the industry, the nature, and the people, have to be included in sustainability going forward. Again, I think kind of historically, we were very focused on just the health of the fish stocks, defining sustainability. And I think this broader view, this more holistic ecosystem level initiatives going forward are the vision that we see for truly sustainable seafood, incorporating, again, nature, people, and sustainable business, right? That's what it's all about at the end of the day.
And the future of the Sustainable Fisheries Partnership?
Well, we're hoping to, I think, grow with our partners on this journey, looking more at those ecosystem impacts, being able to continue to inform them about the latest sort of science and trends. Again, climate change is something that we're all trying to understand how that is impacting fisheries. So I think our vision for SFP is to continue to be a resource for seafood buyers and keep them up to date on these challenges and how they can best engage in ensuring the long-term sustainability of these resources and of these fishing communities going forward. So I think SFP hopes to continue to support the seafood industry in addressing these new challenges as they come up.
There must be enormous aquaculture in like the central, what I would class as the Central American countries, because we've been many time holidaying in Florida ourselves. And any what we would call prawns or shrimps would be coming from there.
Coming from, yes. Yeah, I feel very lucky to live in Florida, where we have such a great variety of seafood, really, between the Gulf and the South Atlantic. And coming back to your point, seasonality is very important in that as well. And yeah, it's abundant fisheries. I think just coming back to what's SFP's sort of vision for the future, and we hope to have 100% sustainable seafood for everyone, that it's not just sort of a niche thing, but it's just a mainstream. Everyone has access to seafood that's sustainable.
It was fascinating for me in the earlier times we were over when I was younger, because we never even think about it here. I'm right in the very north of Scotland. We're 58 degrees north, which if you go along your way, it would be about the Hudson Bay. It's very far north. So, and we have great water quality and displacement, and when we were out in Florida, you would go into seafood restaurants and people would be asking about the water, when they were buying oysters.
Mm.
Very particular. I can understand now, but it was a fascination for me, and we never even thought of it here. We just expected it to be top quality.
Yeah, do you mean the water quality here?
Yeah,
Yeah.
where the oysters and things like that were being farmed.
Yes, yeah. Well, we have had some issues in Florida with red tide, they call it, which we've had some really bad episodes of that over the last couple of years. And that has certainly impacted fisheries and marine wildlife here. And certainly, yeah, scallops, oysters. Yeah, it's definitely top of mind here.
Most of the seafood, in fact, all the seafood, I would have said that we would, from restaurants. I remember talking to a supplier once who I knew very well. I met him over here, and almost all the seafood that is even used as far as Florida would come from the Lake of Seattle and up the north, like the Pacific.
Yeah, I mean, again, I think the global nature of seafood is one of the things that make this industry so kind of interesting and different from other commodities and other proteins. Just the kind of wide variety of places that you can get seafood from, and yeah, see in anywhere you are in the world.
So a lot of it, for people to get your guidance, it would be very much online.
Yes, we have a lot of online tools. As I said, the Fish Source database is probably our biggest database and most used among the industry, but again, open to absolutely anyone, publicly available online. And then our Bycatch Solutions Hub is bycatchsolutions.org, and our website is sustainablefish.org. And yeah, we're a global organization. We all work out of our homes. So yeah, we're all virtual and can work with anyone anywhere.
What's the view on the dreaded S word, seals?
Seals. I don't know.
They're protected, and the numbers of them are just going crazy. And they eat so much fish. Around the UK, the consumption of fish by seals is greater than the fisherman's total allowable catch.
Wow. Wow. I guess you need some great white sharks maybe to balance out the ecosystem. I think that's what happened off of New England here in the US. There was a huge resurgence in the seal population. And then a year or so later, a lot more great white sharks were coming to the area.
Funny enough, the killer whales, the orcas,
Yeah.
a lot of them have appeared in Shetland, which is north of where we are.
Hmm.
And I just often wonder if it's nature's way of controlling things.
Yeah. Yeah. Absolutely. The balance of the
Yeah.
ecosystem is so important, right?
Another thing I would mention to you from listening to what you say about what you do with gear and bycatch and things, it might be worth taking a note. I've done a recent podcast with a guy, Tom Rossiter, his name. Now, it was just done recently, and it's due to be gone out next week. And it's catch cam technology. And it is just incredible, the clarity and how sophisticated they were.
Hmm.
And we mentioned seals. There's one film. I think you might even see it online. I don't know if you might have it online, but the camera shows the cod end, as we call it, of the trawl. Where the fish are, and the seals were coming up to the cod end and bumping it with their nose, and small fish would escape.
Wow.
And
Wow.
he said that they're so intelligent, it's frightening. And then it gets to the stage where one of them went into the net, right down to the cod end. They reckoned he turns at the end of the cod end like an Olympic swimmer when they're turning to come back up their lane and had some fish and swam back out the net.
Wow. That's amazing.
So that might be something interesting for you to collaborate with us as well.
Yeah,
Kathryn,
again, I mean, wonderful, wonderful innovations that there are out there, new technologies to be able to really, see all these different interactions happening on the water.
do you see AI being used?
Yeah, that's another, change that we're seeing. Some of the high seas fishing vessels, particularly tuna fishing that, happens, they have electronic monitoring is becoming more and more important in those fisheries to help better understand, bycatch and things like that, in compliance with different regulations. And I think, if you think about a camera being on a vessel like that and all the hours that it might record fishing effort and fishing catch, and like how we're going to process all that data in a meaningful way for science, I think AI is the only way to go in terms of being able to, not the only way to go, but could certainly help augment the data collection process and analysis process of things like electronic monitoring, which again is picking up, I think, more and more in some of these high seas fleets as a tool for, again, augmenting observer coverage and things like that. So yeah, I definitely think we'll see more about AI in the future for fisheries management and all sorts of other opportunities.
I downloaded one of the apps and I said to my son, who does all the background stuff for my podcasts, I told him that I had it, and he came back with his reply was, welcome to AI. Your life is going to be much better.
Yeah, we're in exciting times from that perspective.
Kathryn, where can our listeners follow you online?
We have a LinkedIn that Sustainable Fisheries Partnership, and then our web address is sustainablefish.org. O-R-G.
Okay. Well, Kathryn, I think it'll just a good time to thank you very much and end the recording. Thank you so much.
Thank you. It was wonderful to have the opportunity to speak with you.
Thank you. Thank you.